Yeah, all of the ones I've got on here are actually published by the International Chamber of Commerce. Just to make sure there's no confusion, the International Chamber of Commerce is the official sounding name for not defending that. It's not a regulatory body or a government body or any sort of ability to enforce any rules. It's just a volunteer organization where people get together and come up with agreed standards. They publish those standards, and actually their entire source of income, as I understand it, is selling the books. So these green things are all examples of books that you can order from the International Chamber of Commerce. The blue ones are laws. So these are passed in whatever country they might be used in. They apply them within that country. So, for example, in the United States, we have a law governing the obligations of parties who are using letters of credit. That's part of the Uniform Commercial Code, specifically it's Article 5 of the Uniform Commercial Code. That has been enacted in all 50 states in the United States. And like I say, it applies only to what happens in the United States. If I have a letter of credit that's issued in another country, that issuing bank is not subject to the Uniform Commercial Code. But if the beneficiary is in the United States and there's an advising bank, maybe a confirming bank, maybe a bank doing financing, they would be subject to the Uniform Commercial Code as regards how they handle that letter of credit. Excuse me. Let me take a sip of water here. The UN Convention is an example of an international model law. The United Nations puts together these things for individual countries to adopt. The United Nations itself has no authority to impose laws on anybody, so they do all this work. This one's done through, I believe, UNCITRAL, the UN Council for International Trade Law. So they came up with a model law for people to use for international sale of goods. That's called the Convention on Contracts for the International Sale of Goods, or CISG. But none of those are the focus. It's just to say when you're exporting, you have to be aware of all these things. We're more concerned today about these regulations, and not even all of those. The regulations for export licensing and foreign exchange controls are not part of today's discussion. But export licensing, just to make sure people understand, is what the regulations are in that country you're exporting from, so in the United States, for those in the United States. As far as what you're allowed to export and who you're allowed to export it to, and what kind of licenses you need to get in order to do that activity. For example, we will today be talking about something called the designated parties. They're part of the OFAC regulations. We'll come to that here in just a second. The export licensing regulations have a group of people that are sometimes confused with that, called the denied parties. The denied parties are people who have violated other regulations, and as an enforcement action, the U.S. government has decided not to issue them export licenses for some period of time. So that's what denied actually has to do with. If you are exporting, it's very important to understand, with regards to your own product, what it is that you're exporting, what the licensing requirements are, and there are a lot of different regulatory bodies in the United States that govern this stuff. The biggest one's the Department of Commerce that has the export administration regulations. But for example, the Department of Defense has regulations that cover what you're allowed to ship in the way of military goods, or when you're trying to ship anything to a military buyer, things like that. It's a different regulation. That's called the ITAR. That has to do with the shipment of arms. Foreign exchange controls are interesting. Just for those of us in the United States, there are no foreign exchange controls that we are subject to, but there are such controls in other countries. So when you're doing international transactions, your buyer, if you're selling to somebody in another country, your buyer might be subject to foreign exchange controls. So those are limitations on that trading local currency for foreign currency, or vice versa. Just to drop down to the last one, we're not talking about anti-corruption. That has to do with, well, it's called the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. Has to do with, in the United States, has to do with selling goods to people and taking, or I'm sorry, giving the parties that you're getting the sales from gifts in exchange. So it's like bribes, to put it bluntly. So that's what those regulations have to do with. Okay, the ones we're talking about today are the three that are circled. Sanctions. So those are regulations that just very broadly prohibit doing business with somebody that's considered to be an enemy of the United States, at least as regards to the United States. Anti-boycott regulations, which are just the opposite. That's where another country has sanctions, and the United States prohibits U.S. companies from participating in the foreign boycott. But like I say, that's essentially sanctions, but we refer to it as boycotts when other countries do it, and for whatever reason, sanctions when we do it or when other countries that the U.S. is cooperating with do it. And then we're also going to talk about anti-money laundering regulations. Those have become particularly concerning as time has progressed. The Bank Secrecy Act is a regulation that has been around for a long time. But it didn't cause a whole lot of concern. The biggest thing people are aware of from the Bank Secrecy Act is the regulations where banks have to report cash transactions, so deposits of more than $10,000 in cash. Anybody who is making large cash deposits needs to be reported. The idea being if you're a drug dealer in particular, or even engaged in other types of crime, that you're probably doing business in cash. So that's sort of an indicator, a red flag. It's not to say anybody's done anything wrong, it's just a reporting requirement. But since 9/11, the Patriot Act supercharged, if you will, the Bank Secrecy Act. And we're going to go into what banks are now doing in order to comply with that and what that impact then is on exporters in particular when banks do comply with the Patriot Act. So this is kind of an outline. Those three things are the big topics.